What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
Today's guest, Ernesto Gomez, takes us on a global perspective on a very important subject, which is how do we take the people that choose to follow us and help them reach their potential, which releases the energy of our companies to achieve the potential of the organization that we're trying to steer. Ernesto hails from Mexico and was a CHRO of one of the largest, literally global corporations. Had led a team of 83,000 people as the chief human resources officer, and it gave him a unique perspective on performance. And I'm looking at my notes over here because of the fact that it's a global consumer package company, and he was in charge of steering global talent as well as cultural initiatives. And I just thought his perspective, whether you're working for a large national corporation or an entrepreneurial business that's trying to scale to what you dream it to be, that you needed to hear his thoughts and work. So that it actually manifests itself in a book that he calls Regrowth. So Ernesto, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. So Ernesto, as we were talking, we were looking at that you had an opportunity. And first of all, tell us a little bit about the company that you were charged with shepherding the human resources talent, so people can understand a perspective of the platform that you leaped from.
Yeah, well, but at the time that I was a CHRO for this company, it was a company that reached about 32 countries, we were saying about 83,000 people. And I was giving a major challenge back then, which was we need to prepare for the succession of all the CEOs and C-suite teams of all these different business units that comprise this large company. This company was a conglomerate, and it had an automotive division, a food division, petrochemical division, and also an IT division.
Right. I think the name of the company was Grupo, as I'm pronouncing it correct, is Grupo Alpha?
Grupo Alpha, correct. Based in Monterrey, Mexico, and it was back then. In the way today Grupo Alpha operates, it has now spinned off these major business units, which now are public companies of their own. So it has changed the strategy to release value for the shareholders. You know that conglomerates these days are not necessarily the preferred investment opportunity. People want to buy, specific industries. So they decided to change that. But at the time that I was helping them with the succession plan, it was this whole conglomerate, which it was about 4 or 5 years ago, not too long.
Yeah, and so because of that, you had an opportunity to actually interact with some C-suite, some CEO leaders of organizations, and had discussions with them about performance versus potential. What did your questions or study show?
I got familiar, of course, with most of them. I was helping them, grow and support their talent development initiatives. And when talking with the CEOs, I always wanted to start with a question. You say, you have your C-suite team, you have the people that you trust. Those are the ones that are going to help you drive the company to perform, according to the expectation of your guidelines and, of course, your shareholders, etc. Now, you know them very well because either you had handpicked them or you approved to have them in your team. And the question that I asked them is, well, the actual performance they show today compared with what you think they're capable of, which it would be, potential. What percentage do you think they are redeeming from the potential they have? And I was surprised because the answer that I got the most was 50%.
Mm.
So somebody even said less than that. So, wait a minute. So you're telling me that these people that you trust, that you know very well, you think they are not really achieving their potential, which they are literally halfway of what they can do. And you say, yeah, so why is that? So they will say, well, companies are complicated, large companies and even small companies as well have, bureaucracy. Sometimes you have silos. Of course, making decisions is hard. So those things affect and impact, the performance. And the next question was, well, but you're supposed to design for that. I mean, you are the CEO. Why haven't you done something about it? And, sooner or later, it came out to be, well, because this is companies are made out of people, and people are really difficult and complex. And organizations have a way to sometimes limit or restrict what people can do. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to write a book about this because I need to find a way. And my question is there a way to design for a system that could allow people to reach their potential? And what kind of system would that be? Because no matter if you're a small company or a large company, you have to be mindful about what kind of bandwidth you want to create with your teams and people, because sometimes we this is a self-inflicted wound most of the times.
Now, tell us tell me what you mean by this when you say it's a self-inflicted wound.
Because self-inflicted wound is when you, for instance, when you design an organization, you create silos by design. You say functionally, this is going to be one area, going to be marketing, logistics, operations, etc. And of course, the next thing to do is to create processes to communicate those functional areas. But processes and functional areas are not enough.
Mm-hmm.
You need to kind of lubricate communication, interaction, ways of working that will allow that initially designed structure, which is, what you do to create more value because you specialize and you create a function to focus on certain things, and you create another function to focus on another things.
Yeah. So you're kind of bending Deming's quote you were telling about earlier,
Yeah.
which is a bad system will outperform a good employee. And you and I, that's we're like mindset, because I've watched so many times where a good employee will take a bad system and it will go in and start doing some things. It will outperform. It will find a way to increase performance because they bring not just their mind to a situation, but you, in your book, Regrowth, you talk about heart a lot. It has to do with getting the person committed to what's going on so you can release their internal talent and their internal drive.
That is correct. That is correct. And, at some point in time, let me put it this way. When you go early in the morning to your office and you open the door and you see the plant or you see the factory or whatever, and it's empty, that's not the company. That's just the assets that are in place for the company to exist. Once people arrive and sit in their desks or do things, now you have the company. Now you
Mm-hmm.
can see what the company is
Wow.
about, right? So at night, the company does not exist.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, from 8 to 5.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. You're describing it. My company that I had, Stevenson and Company, was an executive search firm, a staffing company. We had an IT arm. The company was just a shell until
Yeah,
the people started performing, didn't it?
exactly.
Yeah.
So you think, well, you either sometimes you say, well, do your best, and I'm going to try to get out of the way, or sometimes you can help people, connect with themselves, give them the tools, create the conditions so that people can really achieve. One of the things that I've seen and I've witnessed in small and large companies is people really want to do well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the core, people really want to perform, want to contribute, and it's I don't know, Brad, it breaks my heart sometimes when we are in the way of allowing people to do their best job. So you were saying, how can you connect and how can you help people connect with their potential and so that they can contribute that to the company? Uh, it's a very complex question, but I see it in three dimensions. I see a dimension that I call talent density, another dimension, which is, of course, culture, and mindset, which is individual and collective mindset. The gateway to potential, it's predicated on ideas. Ideas meaning there is a spark that you create, and people use that spark to create an dormant, awake dormant energy, so that that energy can be, fueling the performance of themselves and in the company. And if you look at that, it's very interesting. I read an author called Hubert Joly that he says that, ideas have energy, and energy can be created. That kind of energy, it's self-created. You don't need anything but, having people share that idea, which can be purpose, which can be many things, right? So going back to the talent density, culture, and mindset system that I was telling you about, you have to design for what kind of talent I need for people in place, and what kind of interactions they need to flourish, the conditions, the context, which is culture in the company, and of course, what kind of individual and collective mindset you want to spark, so that people can, go inside themselves and find that energy, and replenish that energy to perform. And
Yeah.
in the what I present, that system.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I love this word culture. I mean, Charles Deming came out with the word quality, the ISO
Yeah.
9000, all that stuff. And so everything was quality, right? Well, after a while, the word quality started losing its meaning because it was, kind of overused and it's just whatever. Culture became a big buzzword over the course of the last few years. And it's still really important to understand what culture is. But one of the things I've been doing in the interviews that I do is always ask people, what's your definition of culture?
Well, thank you for asking that question. There are, I checked, and there are almost 200 different definitions of culture
Mm-hmm.
out there. I mean, it's, the way things are done here, the incentives you create. Uh, Culture is like, the water in a fishbowl. The fishes, they don't know it's there, but it's there, and they take oxygen from there. There are many, many things. I really believe that is kind of simple. Is the way is how people interact.
Mm.
It's based on interactions. Uh, and one of the frustrations that I had back in the day when I tried to figure out how to design for a culture for this conglomerate, was that it's very complex. When you talk to colleagues and some consultants, they come up with very sophisticated, multifactorial tools and ways with 15, 20, 25 dimensions that you have to take care of, and what kind of behaviors you want to create. And it's really complex. And I challenged myself and say, you know what, I'm going to try to simplify this so that it's going to be easier to operate. So in the book, I present 3 determinants for culture, just 3. Of course, there is a double click in each one of them. The first one, I call it the creed. What is the creed of the company? And that is, based on values, principles, whatever things the company stands for. Most companies I've found have between 5 or 7 values or principles. So it's better to have it short, but some other companies have it large, like Amazon, for instance. I believe they have 18 principles.
Yeah.
ABM Bev also, they have lots of them, and it's fine. But you have to have that, and within those, there has to be coherence, congruence, and a clear way to understand what they mean and how they are connected with what the company wants to achieve, which is purpose. That is the first one. The second determinant, I call it the contextual effect. How context limits or favors those that creed, to be played in real life. Most companies, when you grow, you create systems and processes to ensure that you're gonna be reliable and perform well. And in doing that, you create like a playbook that sometimes is limiting. And you create incentives, that are based on that. For instance, let's say that one of the things that you stand for is creativity, innovation, etc. But then you have an incentive in the way you pay your variable compensation, etc., that really goes against failing, or that forces you to hit your number, and with 3 or 4 decimals. Otherwise, you will not make the cut. It's very likely that you will not
Be too creative. No, not going to stretch a little bit, will you?
Exactly. So you have to understand, and of course there are routines and processes and systems in the company. So I like to see, how the company is designed in terms of, this infrastructure of mechanisms that enhance behavior or not. And the last determinant of culture, I call it the stewardship model. It can be also be named, leadership model, which is culture in action. How culture it's being deployed not only as isolated behaviors, but as a model of leadership that people can assume or understand. For instance, and I call it stewardship because I really like to put the accent on the leader stewards a team, and the team, it's the most important component. When you think about leadership, sometimes you think about heroes, right? And inevitably you think, well, I'm a leader, therefore I'm the visionary, etc. Some people don't see themselves that way for whatever the reason. And some teams are kind of conditioned to follow the leader because the leader, has authority or whatever. But when you think about stewardship, you change a little bit the perspective, and that
Right.
name seems to work fine for me. It can be leader steward or steward. So, and in stewardship, I describe 4 elements, which are basic. You can have more, but 4 elements for stewardship. One is, of course, ownership. You have to own whatever you do. Second one is ego versus truth. How much ego, you're willing to control in search of what is best to do.
And so I
And
want to make sure I understood what you said. You're talking about is ego versus
truth.
truth. That's what I thought you said. Now, I want to sit on that for just a minute because of it's so important in today's time that we need to have leaders that chart a course, that take risks, that point us and stretch us. Because I love what you were saying. Is that I personally agree that nobody wakes up today and say, you know what, I want to be less today than I was yesterday. I
Yeah.
just I don't think we're humanly wired that way. God created us to want more. And I think sometimes we're afraid to step into it because we're afraid we're going to fail. We're not going to get what we want or what have you. And it stops us sometimes from doing this. Leaders in today's culture is to figure out, how do I get the team focused on all we can be, and what do I do in that? And I love this thing about stewardship. It's to be a steward as opposed to being the trailblazer in the front. But to share your perspective of where leadership ego robs us from pursuing truth, and why truth is more important than will.
Well, I always operated. I'm going to talk about myself first, and then I will try to expand this idea into the concept you are describing. I've always thought, as I, escalated positions in the company, that I was getting paid because I was the one who knew most. I was the authority, right? The experienced person. So I even felt bad when I did not, show that, because I felt that, this is the expectation. I'm the person in charge, so I am supposed to call the shots, right? And when you do that, and of course, as you evolve, and this happened to me, come to realize that you don't have all the answers all the time, and most of the time, you have limited perspective on what the problem really is. And if you have been a boss for a long time, ego gets in the way very, very often, because all of a sudden you feel like, since I've been right before, I'm going to be right again. But if you change that idea of, well, I'm not supposed to have all the answers. What I'm supposed is to find the right answer in a way that benefits the company. That change, that setting really changes. And I'm going to rescue not other than Steve Jobs and bring him into the conversation, because he's credited, for playing with this idea. He said that I don't want to be right. I want to get it right. And it's very different, because being right involves, I'm the enlightened one, as opposed to have it right or get it right, which means even if I don't have the answer, somebody may have them, and I don't care who provided the answer, as long as it's the right, path to take. So it was very interesting, because you have to have ego, a certain, a healthy amount of ego, but at the same time, you have to balance that with truth finding or truth.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.